All the neighbors bear the burdens of the consequences. Is there evidence for this strategy or conspiracy? Absolutely. Everything we've just shown tonight. This is the silent United Nations invasion in our own backyard. And we also see in today's world a global regional government that has spread throughout the world. A regional infrastructure, which you're going to get all the nuts and bolts of tonight.
Well, I'm Kevin Paulson, and just welcoming you out to the Defending Utah event. Thanks for coming. I'll just tell you a little bit about me. I joined Defending Utah about 7 or 8 years ago, and I had been researching 9/11 for quite a while, and I'm an engineer, and so I was kind of taken aback by the whole thing, and I had been going down the rabbit hole for a while, and I didn't really have a lot of friends that understood it. And so I was really in search of people that I could relate to. And I saw a Facebook ad for an event in Orem, and I was living in Salt Lake at the time. And I said, I have to go to this. And so it was actually full. And so I reached out to the guys, and they said, hey, let's meet for lunch. And so we met and talked for 3 hours about all the crazy things that were going on. And so I thought, hey, this is my group. So I joined, and I've been getting involved ever since, and I really enjoy that. So it's nice to be able to be involved and actually do something that impacts, for better, the world, and for worse, the conspiracy. So anyway, I'll just briefly introduce Enoch Moore. He's going to be speaking to us about regionalism, and this is a big deal. There's a push for global government. I'm sure you guys have all heard about that. That's the first step, is regionalism. And what they want to do is they want to take away the power of the people locally and push that as far away from the local communities as they can, so that you have less power. So Enoch's going to tell us more about that, and briefly before that, we'll have a prayer.
Subject tonight, regionalism is something that a lot of people don't know much about. And it's mostly the conspiracy theorists and the birchers that really get into it, that have even kind of heard the word a little bit. And it's something that's all around us all the time. We don't even realize what an integral part of our life it's become. And so tonight's presentation is just going to really break that down for you guys. Shadow government, regionalism, and high-density housing. This is the silent United Nations invasion in our own backyards. Okay, so as we break down this problem this month, we are going to then tease a little bit on what do we do about it, and that deep dive on what you do about it is next month. Okay, so it's a bit of a two-part series here. We don't want to sit here for 5 hours tonight, right? Thomas Jefferson said the qualifications for self-government, they're not innate. They are the result of habit and long training. And that's why we do these events. That's what we do at Defending Utah. And trying to carry on the tradition of the founding fathers. If anyone here is new to Defending Utah, or any of our attendees on Zoom, I would advise, go to our website and click the Learn tab, and we have this thing called the Liberty Boot Camp, and go through that course. It covers a lot of fundamentals that tonight I'm going to make some assumptions that you don't need background on certain things. However, I am going to take about 20 minutes to review some fundamentals that are directly applicable to what we're talking about tonight. Okay? All right, so this guy right here, Congressman Larry McDonald, 1976. He said, the drive of the Rockefellers and their allies is to create a one-world government combining super-capitalism and communism under the same tent. Do I mean conspiracy? Yes, I do. I'm convinced there is such a plot, international in scope, generations old in planning, and incredibly evil in intent. So fast forward to 2022, you see this language everywhere, public-private partnerships, in just about everything that government does nowadays. They're bragging like, isn't it great, business and government are cooperating. And we also see in today's world a global regional government that has spread throughout the world, a regional infrastructure, which you're going to get all the nuts and bolts of tonight. So topical guide for this presentation, we're going to do some fundamentals, the review of some fundamentals on natural law, and then we're going to talk about regionalism versus federalism, what's the difference, and we're going to compare them. Then we're going to pivot to high-density housing, and then a little case study on property rights to sort of apply the knowledge that we're talking about in a very practical way. This is important so that we know how to work with our local municipalities and so that we understand real-life situations. And then in conclusion, some invitation and starting to talk about solutions. We'll talk about natural laws here. What a natural law is. Natural laws must be observed. There's no book on natural laws. It's in nature, so that's why the founders talked about nature's God. A natural law is a system of law based on close observation of human nature. Positive law is the express enacted laws of a state or society. So natural law creates our rights. Positive law, done correctly, should protect those rights. Positive law can be good or bad, and it can change, whereas natural law, it's neutral. It doesn't change. It's not good or bad, but anyone can use it for good or for bad. Okay, and that's the key. So to fight tyranny, we cannot rely 100% on positive law because law can be corrupted. But we can rely 100% on natural law because it doesn't change. So understanding natural law and how to use it is something predictable that we can work with. So 3 natural law examples. Gravity, the most obvious, the easiest to point out. Okay, there's no book written down, no legislature ever passed, gravity shall be true, right? It's inherent in nature, and the only way we know it exists for sure is we can observe it. In fact, the legislature, our legislatures do things as ridiculous as trying to outlaw gravity. All the gender stuff and everything, right? But no matter what they do on paper, if everybody in the world would believe that gravity was now irrelevant or illegal, we can always observe that in nature. The labor theory of property is a natural law that philosopher John Locke talked about. He was someone who the founding fathers were very well educated on. Okay, so to explain this law, okay, here's a pile of rocks. Okay, and let's say nobody lives on the earth yet, and God puts all these rocks on the earth. Okay, who do they belong to? Well, nobody. There's no one even here yet, right? But now people start to come on the earth. How do you decide who gets the rocks? And this is what the labor theory of property is all about. So the first person to go and pick up the rock gets to keep the rock. They pick it up, they start building a house. They've now made a house. There's plenty of rocks for everybody on the earth, right? But that natural act of exerting your labor upon natural resources is how we establish property rights. And this philosophy is exactly what the homestead laws in our country were based on, and beneficial use and those sorts of things. These are things that if government didn't exist, people would acknowledge. You show up somewhere, someone had already built a house, you're not going to question that it's not your house, right? So, another natural law, and this is the important one that overshadows what we're talking about tonight. Political power comes from assembling together plus time. Okay, so something you may need to think about, and as we talk through the examples, it'll make more and more sense. In the Declaration of Independence, the founders said it is the right of the people to institute new government. Therefore, we, the representatives of the United States, assembled, appealing to the supreme judge of the world. So they assembled themselves together and they appealed to God, the author of the laws that they were standing upon. And then they defended that right to assemble. Congress shall make no law abridging the right of the people peaceably to assemble. How important is our right to assemble? Samuel Adams formed or assembled committees for what purpose? To weaken British power at the town level. So Samuel Adams used this principle for the very express purpose of weakening the tyranny that was among them. Okay? The enemies of freedom have used this natural law already to create a regional government system that is destroying our republic. Okay, this is the natural law that they have used. There was never a constitutional amendment that said, let's have a regional system instead. They just claimed it, and they started acting a certain way and did things. So put that thought on hold then. We're going to talk about that throughout tonight. But so reviewing the fundamentals again in the Declaration of Independence. People are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness or property. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So what is government? Let's switch that yellow word out. Okay? To secure these rights, an assembly of people that represent the individuals is instituted. That's what government is, an assembly of people. We already have an assembly in this room already in one form. Just depending on what we do with our time, it's not far off from what they are talking about. Okay, so an assembly of people representing the individuals, that is local government. That's your city council, it's any level of government, right? City council, county council, or committees as the founding fathers organized. Okay, so government is nothing more than an extension of the right to self-defense. And the right to self-defense is your right to secure the rights that God has given you. Anything else is a usurpation. So a takeaway from this review, okay, let's walk through this logically in the Declaration of Independence. If governments are instituted to secure our rights, and whenever government stops securing our rights, they're destructive of these ends, the founders said it's the right of the people to alter or abolish and institute new government. So the right to assemble was enumerated so people could petition for redress or institute new government. That's why we have the right to assemble. So when the government's doing things that make us mad, like locking us down, shutting down businesses, why do you think one of the first things they wanted to do was take away our right to assemble? Right? It's very directly connected. And I'll emphasize, the enemies of freedom, they've already assembled, and they have instituted a new shadow government. They use the same natural principle. Okay, so what is regionalism? Let's compare regionalism versus federalism. These are two systems. So we're going to do a review of federalism. So it's going to be a little bit of a review again, but I'm going to emphasize some things that are important. Then we're going to do an overview of regionalism, and then we're going to compare them side by side. Okay, so one system is supported by the Founding Fathers. The other one is supported by the United Nations. So in a federal system, we have separation of powers. We have proper boundaries. When you have proper boundaries, the people can control their government. So understanding the importance of boundaries. If you don't know where the edge is, how do you know what people get to choose what's going on with that government? It's one of the most fundamental things. When you blur those boundaries, it's like, well, who gets to vote now, right? Who's being represented? We don't know, right? You can't answer that question. So boundaries are so important. And then, okay, so we have a horizontal separation of powers in our country from top to bottom with clear boundaries, and we have a vertical separation of powers. Okay, but this whole system, this is not the whole of our American system. We have one more, the most important step that keeps the people in power. You take that entire framework and you have to control it. Thomas Jefferson said, bind it down by the chains of the Constitution so that none of them can be up to mischief. So the constitutions are the final arbiters on the limits of any government power. Okay? The Constitution is the law for the government. So let's think about that word then, the law for the government. So what's the law for us? Assuming we had a really righteous, good government, and the laws upon us that we would honor and follow are written by the legislature. How do they make sure that the people honor the laws? Anyone can just yell it out. Force. Right. Actually, yeah, right? At the end of the day, government is force. That's why the founder said it's like fire. And so they have a police force to enforce the laws on us. So who enforces the law for the government? In theory, all of those answers are kind of correct. Kind of nobody right now feels like, right? No one is, but also all these others. Everybody. This is the answer. Everyone enforces it. That's why the education of the people is so important. Why Benjamin Franklin said a republic, if you can keep it. You guys have to know. George Washington said it's the people are the keepers of it. Right? So what's the mechanism for that? Whenever the government breaks the law, violates the Constitution, he says a nullification of all unauthorized acts is the rightful remedy. Okay, so nullification is a principle that we're going to pick apart here between each of these layers of government that are separate and they have jurisdiction, so they have boundaries as far as law, what they are allowed to do, as much as there's physical boundaries. Okay, so nullification can happen at any of these layers. City can tell a county, hey, you can't make us sacrifice the firstborn of every family. That doesn't make any sense. We're not going to go along with that rule. State can say, we're not going to enforce Obamacare in this town. Right? So nullification is basically the act of saying no to somebody else, but it's on principle. It's because the chains of the Constitution overshadow the whole system. Any level of government can appeal to it. Okay? Because when you're doing that, they're actually acting on behalf of the people that they represent. And the people are the highest authority. Okay? It's same with vertical. Vertical separation, horizontal separation. Nullification is when whatever office you're in, the people are educated on the Constitution and they know when something's wrong that a different branch did. Each branch is a jealous guardian of its own power against encroachments from the other branches. Okay, so the takeaway here is that nullification keeps the Constitution alive. Okay, so if the Constitution is going to stay alive, and this principle needs to be upheld, if there are people who hate the Constitution because they're tyrants and they're seeking for power, one of the biggest things they hate is nullification. And I'm going to give you an example. Okay? So, I've superimposed a couple of local celebrities. There was a bill in 2014 in Utah to nullify Obamacare in the state of Utah. It was John Birch activists that had worked with a legislator, and they got him to put a bill in to say, in Utah, you can't force us to buy health insurance. Okay, so that bill was going through, and then insiders who hate nullification, they didn't want that bill. They don't even like that principle being honored. And so there was a substitution bill. And so this little story, it's just like a minute audio I'm going to play. This guy right here, this is Bliss Tu, the field director of the John Birch, former regional field director of the John Birch Society, and this is Representative Ken Ivory. Okay, and he got into a little scuffle, and he's going to tell his story here. So this is about a minute. I'm going to play it for you.
Hello, this is Bliss Tu, regional field director with the John Birch Society. I was calling to relay that information about the time I talked with Representative Ken Ivory. I think it was the 2014 legislative session. There was a late committee hearing. Mr. Anderegg, Representative Anderegg, put in a substitution bill to substitute for a bill that was a nullification bill for the state of Utah to nullify the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act operations within the state of Utah. As I remember, Ken Ivory was there to testify in favor of the substitution bill that would have gutted the nullification and made it to just be a bill about Medicare. And so afterwards, I know he testified. I was out of the room at the time, but I came back in the room and the vote was held, and they voted for the new substitute bill. And I was up talking to a couple of legislators by their table, and Mr. Ken Ivory approached me, and I didn't know him immediately. And he told me, he kind of poked his finger at me and says, you need to tell your leaders to quit talking about nullification. And he says, there's a lot of lawyers here in the legislature, and we don't believe that nullification is proper or right. And
Okay, so, hey, all the lawyers, they don't like it, right? We don't like it up here at the legislature, right? We're lawyers. Insiders hate nullification because it's exactly the check and balance that stops a lot of the things they're doing. And I have seen this over the last 10 years in activism over and over and over. Okay, I wrote this article this is about legislation that happened last year, but it was about this facial recognition technology. We're going to talk more about that in a minute as well. And in the bottom of it, I mentioned demand your local city pass a nullification ordinance that facial recognition is illegal in your town. Okay? So it was a suggested solution as I showed how they've created all this surveillance nightmare. So I took this article and I posted it, shared it online, and I've learned generally to avoid the really Republican groups because I've noticed the insider politicians hang out in the party groups because that's where they seem to think they're influencing the grassroots the most, right? It just seems to be where they hang out over the years. So I just don't like arguing with them, and I just sometimes just avoid them. But I decided I'll post in this group today. I shared it, okay? Let's see if you can see this on the screen. So I posted the article, and this guy read that line about nullification, right? And he says, oh, the city is chartered by the state. They're superior. You can count if there's a difference in statute, the state's going to win. Okay? And so here I'm going to educate this guy, I'm thinking, right? Well, all levels of government have to answer to the Constitution. And your statement is correct only so far as there are no violations of the Constitution. Where there are, the individual or the city that represents the individual can nullify. So if I'm wrong, maybe he's going to have a really intelligent, thoughtful response to explain. Yeah, right? Well, I don't know where you're getting your so-called facts, right? Oh, so-called facts. I'd stop listening to them if I were you. Nullification's been tried so many times. Oh, it's a dead issue. Don't even talk about that, right? I've had this experience a dozen times probably over the last 10 years where I ran into someone and I was like, okay. Yeah, so it's pretty predictable. Okay. So, all right, yeah, so we're moving on there. So insiders hate nullification. There's some good examples. And once, now that that's really pointed out to you, if you're out and about and you're being active and trying to make a difference, you run into that. You may notice it now more specifically. It's kind of a red flag to me of showing where somebody's coming from. Okay, so regionalism. Let's get into this regionalism. Definition of regionalism is multiple jurisdictions of government entering into agreements to share, control, functions, organization, or finances to address a common problem. It is not Republican in form. There are no internal separation of powers, at least the way it's been implemented in this country. Blurred jurisdiction or boundaries, very unclear to the citizens, of what's going on if the citizens even know it exists. Okay? The Constitution intentionally limited cooperation between the states, a form of regionalism. It requires congressional approval. This is the Interstate Compact Clause. It was seen as a threat to the health of the nation by the founders to allow states to kind of cooperate and then maybe bully another state or those kinds of things, right? And there's a little more to it, but it was a threat to the nation. It was important that they didn't outright forbid it, but they said, okay, if you're going to do it, you're going to have to ask us and make a good case, and we're going to have to make sure it's proper. Okay, so one exception, the Colorado River Compact was an exception. The river actually goes through a bunch of different states, and there was a rational reason why they had to cooperate on that resource, right? Okay, so regionalism today often circumvents these constitutional restrictions. Regional government is seen by a growing number of public personnel as the solution to this perceived problem, the problem of constitutional limitations, right? It's a problem to them. Is the Constitution a problem, or do the founders know what they're doing? Yeah, I know what they were doing. So, some early examples of regionalism, okay, goes as far back as 1892. This thing called the Uniform Law Commission that still exists today. Better laws, stronger states. Sounds like a good motto, and we should support them. So on their website, you can read it as the purpose of the conference, meaning when they get together, to promote uniformity in the law among the several states. Okay, it is made up of lawyers only. So this is an organization of lawyers writing laws for all the states from a private organization. So they're members, they go to the states and they report back to the Law Commission when things get passed. So this is a quasi-backdoor, unelected national state legislature. It looks like government, it acts like government, kind of. But that's what they're trying to mimic, right? This is a backdoor legislature. Plus, they're all lawyers, right? Lawyers writing laws is always a conflict of interest. It's one of the big problems we have. Another one, 1908, the National Governors Association. Governors of all the states getting together and talking. There's this one, formed in 1933, the Council of State Governments. And on their website, they say, we serve all three branches of government. Right there, they're telling you they're blurring those boundaries. Another quasi-backdoor, unelected national state legislature. Right? So how widespread is this issue? There is this problem. You're going to see, it's just huge. Okay? So those are some early examples, but we're going to talk about this guy for a minute. Charles Merriam, one of the most influential men that people have never heard of. Anyone ever heard the name? So he was born early 1900s. He was a political science professor at the University of Chicago. He had a vision for a governing structure of regional governments with social scientists as technical advisors to the society's political leaders. Okay, his hand can be seen in virtually every facet of modern political science today. He wrote a book in 1945, Systematic Politics. Okay, in this book, I kind of circled there, but I'm going to put it on the screen here. This is pre-United Nations talk of global government he's talking about in his book. Okay, he discusses the legal order of the world, world organization of law, the common good, and he calls sovereignty a mistaken concept. Okay, in 1935, Charles Merriam was on this executive branch committee, the National Resources Committee, and he wrote this report to the President of the United States. So regional factors in national planning and development. So imagine, this is 1935. I showed you a few examples before this, as early as 1892. So there had been some experimenting with regionalists trying to move this agenda forward. And so now he's writing a proposal to the President of the United States on how we can implement regionalism in the United States. So this report is the foundation for today's regional system. In it, 1935. Was it Eisenhower? A quick Google could. Roosevelt? Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I could have Googled that. Yeah. In fact, I'll have the answer for you here in a minute. Roosevelt. Okay, there you go. Roosevelt. Right. Yeah. So in here, this is where you see the early references to this language, public-private partnership. This is where it comes from. And he says, you know, when we build this regional system, instead of trying to replace the federal system, because I imagine they've had some experience now for a few decades playing around with this, they said, we can supplement the existing government. We can merge with it instead of replacing it. Now, in the long run, what you're going to see is they built this parallel system, and if the federal system just dissolves for whatever reason someday, they have a bureaucracy that's ready to just handle business. Okay, he promoted it here that boundaries are illegitimate. He said that they should use any issue as an excuse to merge boundaries wherever they could. Interrelate even federal with state, blur county and state lines. And he says you can develop national policy at the local level. So this is just an obliteration of checks and balances, jurisdiction, boundaries, and so forth. In regionalism, we can find a solution to the problem of division of constitutional powers. Who are these people that are running our country, even almost 100 years ago, right? It's just been treason for so long. Treason to our constitutional system. Fast forward to 1995. This is a UN report, the Commission on Global Governance. Regionalism must precede globalism. We foresee a seamless system of governance from local communities, individual states, regional unions, all the way up through to the United Nations itself. The UN must prepare for a time when regionalism becomes more ascendant worldwide and even help the process along, and it is committed to doing so. The development of global governance is part of the evolution of human efforts to organize life on the planet. We are convinced it is time for the world to move on from the designs evolved over the centuries and given new form. Okay, so this is a United Nations heavily backed program now, worldwide. Here's some examples of how it gets into our local municipalities. 2010, this legislation was passed where $150 million was given to housing and urban development for Sustainable Communities Initiatives, which is United Nations Agenda 21 stuff. Shortly afterwards, executive order in 2012 by Obama authorized HUD, Housing and Urban Development, to engage in city, community, and regional planning. This executive order ensures that federal assistance is more efficiently provided, and HUD now has the ability to create regulations to enforce local and regional planning. So in Utah, just an example of some of that $150 million coming down, just local news reports. HUD awards $4.1 million to preserve housing in Utah, right? You could Google this concept, find a lot, on KSL, on the Tribune, and so forth, right? So this money's coming down to the local level from the feds. Okay, so this is a clip from California News, just a couple of minutes long, and it's going to show the mess that this creates in local municipalities. A mayor is having having a conflict with BART, Bay Area Regional Transportation. It's like our UTA, right? And it shows the mess that's created, and you see the frustration kind of back and forth. So I'm going to play this real quick.
Open IV drug use, unconscious men and women,
Can you turn it up, Brian?
piles of vomit on either side of the hallways. This is a morning walk through the Civic Center BART and Muni station.
And one morning, I got to pull out the camera. I got to show my friends this. They're not going to believe it.
And over the course of a week, Shannon Gafford documented his trip to work. You may find the video shocking. You may find it routine.
Every day, every morning, 5:30, 6 o'clock. I mean, you can see there's dozens of them. And needles everywhere, crack, heroin.
It's a real concern for our riders, and we appreciate that. What we have to do is make the most of the resources, the limited resources that we have.
Hey guys, we need to clear the stairs!
BART, which has been pledging to address these problems, says it's recruiting more community service officers, more than 30 new sworn officers, and 20 new station cleaners. But will that be enough?
The situation on our BART stations is simply unacceptable. The border is disastrous.
San Francisco Mayor Mark Farrell, who today unveiled a $13 million plan to get needles, among other things, off of city streets. But the city's jurisdiction ends when you head down those BART stairs.
I don't care at the end of the day if now we have jurisdictional issues. As mayor, I want to get something done, and I want to make sure that these BART stations are cleaned up.
Now, while homeless services are offered to those in the city's BART stations, the mayor says San Francisco police may be needed because BART admits it is simply overwhelmed by the crisis that has landed in its hallways.
We're in the midst of a national homelessness crisis, and we're also in the middle of a national drug crisis. And unfortunately, as a transit agency, we have limited resources, and we're not really equipped to deal with these social issues.
So this, for now, is the status quo, a daily commute through a human crisis that shows no end.
Okay, so there's actually a lot of different kinds of propaganda in that video, but you can see, you go down the stairs, they don't have jurisdiction in their own town. So we can't do anything about it, and you have this back and forth, and it creates this situation. There are two perspectives you can look at it with. Okay, if you have good elected officials, well, they've lost control of representing you. Right? They're blurring these boundaries, right, creating this mess. If you have elected officials, bad elected officials, they can play dumb, pass the buck, it's not my fault, right? And so they end up just leaving this mess as it is, and no one's doing anything about it. Sorry, it's not my fault, kind of thing, right? Pass the buck. Okay, so let's talk about, if you remember, we talked about this Uniform Law Commission in 1892. At the international level, there's this organization called UNODROIT, which is the same thing, but it's at a global level. Lawyers making laws to unify laws across the world, or nations. So UNODROIT is the international version of the National Uniform Law Commission. I'm trying to connect global to national, and then down to the state level in Utah. They list legislators that are part of their group. These are actual bills they passed in 2018. Lyle Hilliard and Snow. So this is global law, and right here is the evidence that it was, and who did it, that it was put into our legislature. So this shows a backdoor from the United Nations, UNODROIT, Uniform Law Commission into Utah. It is foreign law coming through a back door. Okay, but this is just one back channel. This regional framework, NARC is the National Association of Regional Councils. In Utah, we have the Utah Association of Counties. At the world level, we have United Cities and Local Government, and then which goes to the National League of Cities, and then the Utah League of Cities and Towns. These are all different paths to come into these various regional entities in Utah. We have Mountain Land Association of Governments and Wasatch Front Regional Council. There's dozens of these. Some of them are actual registered NGOs. Others, they just act that way, whether they're official or not. And all of them virtually follow the principle of the problem we're looking at. Okay, so this is the infrastructure of regional governance that's just enveloping the entire world. This is how they're doing it. So they're overriding the sovereignty of every country, whatever system they have, and creating regional unions, blurring the boundaries. Okay, in Utah, here's some of the big ones. Quick Google screenshot. Southeastern Utah Association, Uinta Basin Association, Mountain Land Association of Governments, Wasatch Front Regional Council, League of Cities and Towns, all these. 5 county associations. I always find new ones that just pop up that I never noticed before. Yes?
So they're not elected and you have phone numbers, so you just go in and say, if I can job,
Right. Yeah. I actually have a slide where I walk through one example of, but basically they're corporations. They're like the Federal Reserve, right? They're private, but they're pretending to be government. That's kind of how I think about it. Okay, yeah. Repeating the question. Question was, so who gets in them? You just walk up to their office and ask for a job, and now you're running the regional government. Yeah. Yeah, it's unelected. So I am going to cover that actually for a second. I'm going to give one example of how you get in. But it is unelected. That's the point. And it's blurring the boundaries. And once you're in, it's not accountable to the people whatsoever. Okay. A Utah website, Transparency Utah or Utah It was a government website that was showing finances of the various departments. And you could filter by state, city, county, and they show the numbers that they're spending. So it's supposed to be an accountability site. So I filtered by interlocal, which is regional. And this was actually like 4 or 5 years ago that I took this screenshot. But these are all entities that are violating the principles of separation of powers. Some of them are small and silly, Fox Hollow Golf Course. And others are the bigger ones, like the League of Cities and Towns and so forth. Okay, but all of them, they're violating the principles that we've talked about. Here's an example up north. Envision Cache Valley. They're going across the border and creating a new thing, right? Now, Cache Valley is a culture. There are people they say I'm from Cache Valley, and they do mean this, but they're more putting an actual governance structure on top of it. Okay, so off the record, my friend on the Orem City Council, he's no longer on the Orem City Council, this was a while back, told me, regarding the Utah League of Cities and Towns, I used to not care about what they did. Then one day I realized I needed to show up because that's where they make all these plans for what they're going to do to us. Here's a recent screenshot from the Utah League of Cities and Towns, and they're just putting all these resolutions it's like they're acting like a legislature. We got together, we talked about it. These resolutions find their ways into the cities eventually through various means. Okay, so federalism versus regionalism. We have proper boundaries, but behind it we have this shadow, a regional system. No separation of powers, fuzzy boundaries. The people are not in control. Foreign entities are governing your jurisdiction, your town. Now, this is probably, who here saw Star Wars when it first came out? Okay, so this is actually your fault for not noticing what was happening. Star Wars told us what they were doing. The galaxy was ruled by a Republican form of government in the Galactic Senate, right? But by the time the rebellion began, the Senate's power had been eroded, with regional governors appointed by the emperor. It was wielding more and more control over the galaxy's people.
The regional governors now have direct control over their territories.
The regional governors now have direct control. Okay? So I guess we just let it happen. Right? Yeah. Your question, who becomes part of a regional government? This is a specific example from the League of Cities and Towns. They have their own constitution and bylaws like any private corporation can. It says only those who have been in government somewhere get started. So all officers shall be elected officials of a municipality. So you first have to be elected somewhere. They don't care where. I guess for here it'd be cities because it's the League of Cities and Towns. right? So you got to be elected somewhere, but then now you can, if you want, be a part of these. Okay, government officials, they tend to move up the ladder. So now you're going to make friends in the regional system, and you kind of just move up the ladder. It's politics, making connect, like it's Soviet politics at that point. Elitists appoint their elitist friends. So I imagine these secret societies in Utah, hey, you should be on the board of this nonprofit. Okay, Joe, I'll try that out. Young people who get a degree in urban management or some kind of central planning. So these are degrees that we didn't see 50 years ago in colleges. Urban management is one. You can think of a couple others. City planning. Yeah. So these various Marxist-leaning degrees for central planning. People who happen to be in the right place at the right time, I would say. So this is Julie Fulmer. She is the mayor of Vineyard. Who's been to Vineyard? Who's seen it? The entire thing is just a high-density. Yeah. The whole thing, right? It's just one chunk of high density, right? She must be really good at regional planning, because look at everything she's been on, right? The League of Cities and Towns Board of Directors, UTA Advisory, MPO is Metropolitan Planning Organization, Regional Planning Committee. So all these yellow ones are regional entities that I highlighted, that I knew for sure would be regional. So she just must be she must have a PhD in regional. So, but my point here is she has all this background in regionalism and on these entities. Okay, so her public profile on LinkedIn talks about 2010, she got a degree in graphic design. 2010. By 2011, she's on the planning commission of this brand new city. And she has an uninterrupted career, 2013, 2014. She's on the city council, and she's mayor a few years later. So I guess, I don't know if that's what a graphic design degree gets you. So I thought, where did that come from? How did she get in there? Well, this association she was involved with, Kauffman Scholars, I was curious about that and what it was. And on their website, they talk about, this is Common Core language, college and career ready. They assist young professionals of color, so I think she was a teacher, to thrive in their region. So very early on, this discussion of regions and how it works, and right, they're in these circles where they're already being trained in this somehow. I don't know the whole story, but I just thought that whole path was very interesting, right? Yeah.
Yeah, how did she go from a graphic design degree in Missouri to planning commission the next year in Utah?
Right. She was in Missouri, in college in Missouri, and all of a sudden she's now telling private property owners in Utah what they can do with their land a year later. High density housing. The reason for high density. The Wildlands Project did not pass in the 90s. That was going to make this map the vision for the United States. Okay, where red, how many of you have seen this map before? Familiar with it? Just a few? Okay, right. So red is supposed to be where humans are not allowed to exist. And then yellow is limited, highly restricted use. And then the green, there's spots here and there, is where people are allowed to live. Right? So it's a reservation system for everybody. And this legislation was on the track to being passed until activists got this map to members of Congress and made it too unpopular, and it didn't pass. But you can bet this is the plan we've been following this whole time. The way this is implemented is bit by bit, little by little. So this is a recent example up in Cache County. a proposition that just passed. It was a let's tax people a little more so we can preserve some more land. Sounds like a great idea. Let's preserve some more wilderness. Let's help, things like conservation easements, where the government goes to farmers and says, we'll protect your land, but we want all the rights to development, and when you die, no one can inherit the right to develop it anymore. So what that's doing is taking it off use, making it more wild, wildlands. And and so this recently passed, but piece by piece, this is happening at the very local level. In the local counties and the local cities, they are implementing the Wildlands Project. I actually remember I subscribed to the Sierra Club one year. I joined it so I could kind of see what they were publishing. And they actually had an article, so this is the Sierra Club talking to their people, which would be like environmental activists. And they were discussing, how we could save the environment by just having corridors where, like these, the lines on the map, right, is like lines where people are allowed to travel. So they've been programming this into society for a very long time through various different channels. So all this is together holistically, this is Agenda 21. So in 2013, the Utah legislature goes on record opposing Agenda 21. This was because of John Birch activists. So at the time, I would say today, Agenda 21 is less and less like called a conspiracy theory. I mean, it was talked about in general conference, right, at this point, right? So, but 10 years ago, 2013, this was still kind of a conspiracy theory to a lot of people, unless you were studying it and you knew what you were talking about. So this was good at the time. It really put the legislature on record that this is a real thing. So this legislation says that local subdivisions in Utah should not adopt or implement policy that deliberately or even inadvertently infringes or restricts private property rights. State and local governments are urged across the United States to be well informed regarding the harmful implications of implementing United Nations Agenda 1 strategies for sustainable development. And it urges state and local governments across the United States to not enter into any agreement or expend any sum of money or contract services or give financial aid to non-government or intergovernmental organizations affiliated with Agenda 21, intergovernmental, regional. Okay, NGOs and regional entities they are what is building Agenda 21. And that's like where you need to look for where the majority of the heavy labor is coming from. It urges state and local governments across the U.S. to reject United Nations Agenda 21 and any grant money or financial aid attached to it. That's that local money we talked about that was being funneled down to cities in tiny little grants, from HUD and so forth. Yes? Did this pass? Correct. The question is, did this pass? And yes, it did pass. As a resolution. So that's the key. It doesn't do anything. Yeah. So a legislature that wants to look good, that never does anything good, but wants to tell their constituents, well, I voted for that resolution. Resolution has no teeth. It's not a law. Resolution could say, we want to thank the governor for that nice thing he did last month. We want to honor, whatever institution. Or it's an opinion. It's an opinion of the legislature. They all vote and agree this is our collective opinion. Right. So its value as a resolution was simply putting it on record a little bit more at the time, but no teeth. Right. Yes.
I live in Cottonwood Heights. I was aware of this when it was passed in 2013. A couple of years later, I gave a copy of the resolution to a member of the city council in Cottonwood Heights. He's really a nice guy, friend of mine. And he says, why, this is socialism. I said, yeah, socialism on a world, it's world socialism really implemented regionally or locally. But the thing that I found is these cities and counties, the people that are really in the know what's going on would be maybe the city manager, but certainly the city planner knows what's going on. I think in
Right.
most cases, the city council, they don't know anything. Planning commission knows nothing about this sort of thing.
Right.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, and to your point, the city manager is someone who got educated with an urban planning degree, and out of college in a few years he's making $200,000, right? Big money for kids who think they're saving the earth. Okay, so regional government is the primary pusher of high density. Okay, so if you want to stop high density, you need to understand where it's coming from. Okay, here's the president or the executive director of the League of Cities and Towns. He's doing a Wednesday chat video on the housing gap. There's a lot of constant propaganda from these organizations on housing related issues. Wasatch Front Regional Council, Utah's Housing Gap Coalition. So it's important to understand these entities. They do not represent your local city. Okay, and so why I emphasize that? When you first hear about them, you're like, oh, isn't it great? In fact, elected officials, when over the years, when we've kind of brought up some of these things to them, they're like, well, isn't it great? Like, we're just one little town or one little county. We can all get together and have a larger voice at the state legislature, as if it's a lobbying arm on behalf of the cities to the state. And so a lot of people stop there. Sounds like a good idea. I'm done, right? But that's not what's happening. They're not representing the small towns. They are representing a foreign interest to your town, to your county. So it's a lie that they're there on behalf of the local people to represent them. But I kind of talked about the elites, right? For those of you who have seen our boot camp, you're familiar that the Salt Lake Chamber is an extension of the Alta Club and was created for a specific purpose and continues to do similar things to this day. So this is a training video. I'm just going to play like a quick 20-second clip. Sponsored by regional government entities given to legislators, elected officials, and community partners, whoever those are. Okay, you'll see in this video, it's fear-driven panic rhetoric. Whenever you hear things like, it's a crisis, no, we have a war on drugs, we have to, right? War is always an excuse for breaking the rules. It's an emergency, state of emergency. So he's throwing out, it's a crisis, to kind of imply, it gives the excuse that we're in a hurry here, don't ask too many questions, we just have to do this is important. Okay, always a red flag, those kinds of things.
Today's event is jointly sponsored by Envision Utah, the League of Cities and Towns, and Wasatch Front Regional Council. It is time to exercise bold leadership in addressing the opportunities and challenges brought about by the housing crisis that we face. And make no mistake, it is a crisis.
Make no mistake, right? So if you're on a city council and you're listening to this, you're an elected official and you're like, well, is there really a housing crisis? No, make no mistake. You want to stop a crisis, right? Not that too many people listening were probably motivated to question it anyway, right? But that's the constant repetitive rhetoric, right? So that it doesn't get questioned. Okay, so the alleged problem sold to the public is not enough houses for people. The proposed solution, make more houses. And let's pack them in really tight because that'll make them so much more affordable. No logic in that. The reality, high density housing is not any cheaper. All the reasons publicly told are lies. It is often more expensive. It is part of the Wildlands project to move human settlement. Forgot to comment on that earlier when you saw that map. If you're going to move people out of here, and they're only allowed to live here, you have to build a lot more houses right there. Yes, go ahead.
You might be getting to this, but what do they have plans on how they're going to deal with people that live in rural areas and own land?
Okay, the question was, do they have plans on what they're going to do with the people in rural areas? Right, yeah, if they're going to move them, then what are you going to do, right? You're just going to relocate them with helicopters or like, how is that going to work? So you have a... Okay, so the other comment was ask Ammon Bundy and Lavoy Finicum. So So it's a bigger answer because they're doing a lot of things. Okay, it's a slow social change that they've been working on for a long time. So little by little, they make it less convenient, less profitable to be a farmer in the rural areas. Little by little, they add regulations slowly. Like there's rules like you have to have at least 50 acres to build a house in rural areas. If you want to build 2 houses, you have to have 100 acres. Just dumb rules, which are violations of your property rights, right? But these are slow things, so they want to change the culture slowly. And water rights, that's a big one now, right? As they're moving water, they're actually draining it to fill the salt lake to mine lithium. That's actually what's going on there, right? If you guys have seen that. Right, so that's the conservation easement you're talking about. When the government gives you money to preserve your land, you're tired, you've been farming your whole life, and you're like, well, I can get all this money for the rest of my retirement, but now they've locked that off so that people aren't going to expand there in the future. And so it's a lot of things added together, and the Bundys was a big example, right, out there in the desert. The book Last Rancher Standing that Shauna Cox wrote talks about southern Nevada. There were 50 ranchers living in that county, and Bundy was the last one left because they had slowly been driving them out of business over time. And the Bundys decided they were just going to stand on their property rights in 1992, and they succeeded for a very long time until they had the scuffle. Now they've still succeeded. They're still there. So, but basically that answers your question, right? It's a slow change, and they just want to move people slowly as they can. And I am going to cover some more things that they're doing. So that's the reason for high-density housing. So I skipped answering that question directly earlier. They're moving people to the cities, so they have to build houses. It is a crisis for them because they're like, how are we going to fit everybody just in the metropolitan areas? To them, they got to build houses as fast as they can, and they got to explain why they're building it to the public, so they say there's a housing crisis. There's a housing shortage. There's no shortage of housing. Free market can handle those kinds of things, but there is a crisis for them because they have an agenda. Yeah, sure, right. Yeah, a lot of public-private partnerships, right? There's intermingling, and I'm going to tell you an example of when I sat. I'm going to get ahead of myself, but it would answer your question. So, so Envision Utah is the head of Agenda 21 in Utah. It's kind of the association that is pushing that, and they've been working on builders and cities and stakeholders for a long time, and a lot of them are like, this, I can't build this way. I can't make the way they want United Nations cities to look, being walkable and just all the principles that they have. It's more expensive, and it's not what the market's looking for, and so they have to provide financial incentive. They have to subsidize it with grants, and then that's where like a lot of that money that comes down from the feds comes from. And so I heard a city council rep years ago say this to Envision Utah when I went to one of their meetings. I went to a training Envision Utah did for the city councils, and they invited all the city councils, and they asked that very question. They said, there's a builder and he doesn't want to do this. How can we incentivize him? And they said, we've got grants coming for that. So yeah, there is a lot of artificial manipulation going on to make this work over time. Opportunity zones. This is a big one, right? When they build, see, they need to make what they're doing financially viable to somebody. Someone's got to have a motivation. These opportunity zones are where they build all this high density. Now there's all these people. Great, there's an opportunity to serve them. So businesses will pop up there, but of course, you never leave. It's a prison, right? You don't need a car. You've got everything you need right here. You can live your whole life here. Okay.
Okay. Hey, there I am. Yeah, so when I ran for city council in Salt Lake in 2013, the city was doing all kinds of stuff. At the time, they were doing some changes in Sugar House, and they were trying to run the 11th East streetcar through. And so I was protesting all that stuff, and nobody wanted this stuff. Like, nobody in the entire district that I was running in Sugar House wanted it. They hated it. But they were going to ram this through anyway. And the RDA, which is the redevelopment agency that the Planning Commission runs, they had all this money that they were going to dole out to certain key developer friends of theirs. And so they basically they set up the zoning and the money and the tax increment funding so that their friends get these projects. That's how that's exactly what they do.
Thank you. This was my slide to talk about that meeting I went to, right? Envision Utah announced they're going to sell high density to cities, okay? But what I heard at that meeting was not, there's a housing crisis, help us build high density in your town. We need you to help. Totally different conversation they're having. Okay, they said, hey, you have a problem. You have to like fund all your services. You need to grow tax revenue. Well, you know, raising taxes is so unpopular. Why don't you think about your land this way? Treat your city like a farm. Okay, treat your buildings like crops. The crop you plant changes the money you make. So they would say on the same plot of land, you can build a house and you make how much tax revenue off one family. Same land, put a business, you make more tax revenue, or pack in high density on the same amount of land. And that's how you grow your tax revenue. That's what they were telling them. So they'll say whatever they have to say to whatever audience they're working with just to get the agenda through. Okay, there is a principle the founders gave us. Less property is less freedom. Freedom and property rights are inseparably connected. You can't have one without the other. Okay, so the Brookings Institute is a regional think tank. That's exactly what they said. More home, less yard. Okay. It was that same principle that I just talked about at the Envision Utah meeting. Okay, so another angle. I'm going to wind history a little bit to see what this really is. This is an old communist idea. Go read the Communist Manifesto and the original writings of Marx and Engels. Okay, the Soviet Union, after World War II, had a housing crisis, and they built all these big, ugly buildings. This is not a new idea. This is an old playbook. It's because communists, tyrants, central power wants to gather people together where you can control them. It's always been the case. It's a communist idea. So the original writings of Marx and Engels, the housing question or the housing shortage, this was part of their philosophy. You had to say there's always going to be a housing shortage because that's human nature, because capitalists are so evil. Housing shortage in society, the housing shortage is no accident. It's the result of human beings and original sin. So how they solve it, they talk about expropriating luxury dwellings from the property class and giving it to the worker class through various means. You can house them in their houses or you can take their homes. And I remember my political science professor in college explaining this concept to me. And it came back to me as I was preparing this a few months ago. How it was a way to sell the workers. You know, they get to live in mansions. You should live in a mansion, right? Well, so when you take over the system and now it's the worker class in charge. Now we get to live in the mansions, but really it's a lie. So they say they're taking the mansion, but they're locking you up in the prison, right? They're saying this this giant building is a mansion, but really you're sharing a tiny little space in there, right? So it's an old communist idea. Even today's communists agree. Capitalism's housing crisis, right? So that's where this comes from, philosophically. Woe unto them that join house to house. That's Isaiah 5:8. I asked Dr. Scott Bradley, what's wrong with high density? Got some opinions from him. Thoughts to consider. Historically, potential for higher crime, increased costs of policing. Sharing walls, individual rights are naturally swallowed up in collective rights. You don't have to pass a law that says you get less rights, you just have them live somewhere where naturally, right, their rights are swallowed up. No physical land, harder to provide for self in a long-term emergency, can't grow food, increased demand on public services, there's a need for central management, individuals don't feel a stewardship to their land, therefore less to the community, increased infrastructure cost, and once you add smart technology, it is a government surveillance dream. Okay, there was an interview that came out recently. We Are the People Radio did this. Have you guys seen this? It's actually an hour long, but I took like a little 3-minute clip of a few highlights, and then I threw some of my own pictures on it. But if you go to our website, this article has the entire interview on there from their YouTube channel. And actually, after this event, I'm going to publish this on there as well. So I'm going to play this little clip. They're talking about all this high-density Agenda 21, but what the state is doing now with implementing digital surveillance, right, and making it our prison, like China, and the credit score, and that sort of thing.
Buckle your seatbelts, because Chelsea's about to take us on a little ride.
Kind of what the World Economic Forum is doing and how they're ushering everything into our local communities around the globe, especially into Utah. They want Utah to be the hub. They want global citizenship, and they talk about global digital citizens. And what connects us in with that is our digital ID. They want a digital ID for everybody. And Utah Freedom Coalition did a lot to help kind of try to fight the digital ID they were trying to pass here in Utah last year. And they helped get that delayed and stopped, but they're bringing it back this year. So we need help at the Capitol fighting that this session. They are mimicking Stalin's revolution, Industrial Revolution. They're calling it the Fourth Industrial Revolution or the Great Reset. And they're mimicking how he did it. And he came for the agriculture, and they're coming for the water and the agriculture first. How digital identity can improve lives in a post-COVID-19 world. And just so you guys know, they did pass a bill this last session.
This is what the World Economic Forum, these globals, that's their agenda. Mm-hmm. And what you're saying is then you just drop back, said, and in Utah, they just passed a bill that would do what?
They're allowed to enforce isolated quarantines on us now. Their mission, the forum engages the foremost political, business, cultural, and other leaders of society to shape global, regional, and industry agendas. And this brings us to the opportunity zones. So this is straight, from the World Economic Forum, why opportunity zones could be key to transforming our cities. And basically what opportunity zones are, they're a multi-billion-dollar industry. And they do redistricting and rezoning for smart homes and smart appliances for the affordable housing from all the homeless. They've created the homeless situation, but we know what they do. They create a problem so they can come into the solution with the problem, and that's where they implement their agenda. So this affordable housing is going to be smart homes and smart appliances, and that's going to branch out to the smart cities. So your other smart buildings, the theaters, banks, restaurants, hospitals. And then you've got the transit hub that goes through. They want every community connected to a transit hub. And they've just, in California and other states, they've come out and said that they want gas cars banned by 2035. And what they're going to do, they usher in the electric vehicles, but we already know that the grid's not handling it. And so what they're going to do at one point is make us dependent on this transit. And these smart cities, they are calling 5 or 15-minute cities, or walkable cities, or walkable communities, because, and why do we need cars? Everything's within walking distance.
Yeah, it's interesting. And the Utah County Commission, they've been talking about this too.
Yeah.
And bringing all the affordable housing and the high density housing into Utah County.
Yeah, they're bringing it everywhere. They've just down in Washington County, they're down there talking to them about it too. I mean, they want it everywhere. And they really want to bring the rural areas in and urbanize them. If they can't, they'll either bring, the broadband, the smart water, which we'll get into in a minute, the transit hubs, all of it out to them. And if they can't do that, they're going to start dissolving towns and bringing them in.
That's what tyrants want, is they want total control. They want to be able to control your electricity. They want to be able to control how much you drive your car. They want to be able to control if your heat, your food. I mean, they want to be able to watch what you're eating. Because the reason this, again, when you're in a totalitarianism system and you're on United Healthcare, all of a sudden, and it's interesting how they're pushing obesity, because, again, they give the problem, then they give the cure. When they push obesity, and now all of a sudden obesity is this major thing, well, guess who has to come step in and fix it? The government. And why? Because now you eat too much. Well, now you're a burden on the tax payers. So now we're going to watch what's going in your fridge, which they can do with the smart cities, and we can and again, they can have the power to turn off your water.
Yep.
They can have power to turn off your electricity. They can turn off your heat. They can turn off your car. They have absolute control over every single thing in your life, not just your bank.
Right.
And again, this is already happening in China. This is not like this is not a theory. This is already in practice in China. And in Utah, we are rushing to implement smart everything, which gives anything that is smart means they have control over it.
Yeah.
I recommend listen to that whole hour. It's really good. A couple thoughts on that. One thing they didn't get into, because I wasn't going to play the whole thing, is the water. Okay, why they're taking water from rural areas, and they say there's a drought, right? There's been evidence for a long time that lakes are being drained, that they put infrastructure into the lakes to drain them. But grassroots investigators have mapped the whole thing out, that they're draining the lakes, pumping water to the Salt Lake. They're saying Salt Lake is drying up and it needs more water. It's because they're doing lithium mining, because they have to support a new electrical infrastructure for the future that they want. And Salt Lake, because of the salts, is perfect for lithium mining. If you Google what's happening in Salt Lake, you'll find articles all around the world, major newspapers talking about Salt Lake City and the problem, how we're going to save it. The reality is it's all a cover for this lithium mining operation. And that's why they say, like, they want Utah to be the hub, because of the Great Salt Lake and the natural resource we have there for batteries and electrical and so forth. So watch that whole hour. And I would also add in the tyrants of society, the New World Order. They're big dreamers. They have big dreams. So when they say, like, they want total control and they're going to have it by 2030, they've announced a lot of goals over the years, over my lifetime, over your lifetimes, that they have not met. So I want to emphasize that. So understanding their vision just knows the direction they're going, but there are things we can do. It becomes very impractical without a lot of local cooperation. And just making sure meters don't get put in, water meters don't get put in your town, you're not going to get rationed, these new smart water meters. It's the reason we need to stand on in our local municipalities, to our local representatives, is not, well, I don't think that's a good idea, I'm conservative. It's like, this is not for the benefit of our city. This is not coming from our people for the benefit of our people. This is a foreign program. You're supposed to govern our town. And this needs to be the language and the rhetoric that we demand of our local officials, or we're going to talk about solutions a little more, but that's one piece, I think, what we need to think about. Okay? This former software engineer, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I have a question about smart meters. I heard that you can call and refuse or decline to have a smart meter attached to your home, a smart meter or electric meter. Is that true? I mean, how
you
how
can.
true is that?
You can, and I think some people have successfully done that. At the end of the day, that's probably going to be a drop in the bucket of people that learn they can, then go through the effort to try to get it off. You're going to get pushback. Sure. I remember back in the Obama days, they put on the new smart meters on the houses, and now they're doing it again. They're upgrading them. So, and the water meters are new now with the excuse of the drought. But they'll gaslight you. They'll say, oh, there's no radiation coming from those. Same as your cell phone. I remember that was what they said to me like 10 years ago. And so a lot of people will go, oh, okay, maybe I just heard wrong. And so a lot of people will just fizzle out. But if you want to you can successfully not have them put on your house. I think you pay a fee. Now you have a meter reader fee. They do something like that. Yeah. Yeah. They'll make you feel like the weirdo. Right. Yeah.
Saying they were coming in a month to put the smart meters on, and I was like, no. So I called and said, I want to deny this, and they sent me a thing I signed. They didn't tell me I had to pay any extra fee. I signed something saying I refused it, and I don't know if there's going to be any backlash, but...
Yeah. So that's good. Individually, we can do that. But we want to, if we can, stop it at the city level and be the loudest group of people, on all these different issues. Local is where we have to think and protect our local communities. Okay, so this software engineer, you can look up this article, but he used to work in software and he was building a lot of the smart tech. And so he came out as a whistleblower saying, right, cities are being turned into open concentration camps. So you can look that up and kind of get his take on it. And in Utah, so I wrote this article as I had been researching all this because I picked apart and saw what this legislation was doing. So if you read this article on our website, I go through the law that they just passed. It was sold as, we're concerned about facial recognition, so we're going to make sure the government doesn't use it against you. In reality, the bill authorized its use, right? That's kind of like how it works. I've noticed over the years, the worst bills are usually the ones that they say that they're packaged in liberty, right? The privacy bill, we're going to defend your privacy, and it might have all this language that looks really good and actually is good, but then it's designed to have a little exception, and their whole plan is to use the exception as the rule. It's okay, I'll just move to a small rural town and get away from the cities.
I have property in a small rural town,
Yeah.
and I've got a smart meter there.
Okay. Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about it. It was done about 6 months ago. I hadn't heard you can decline it or anything like that. But it's funny, it's a really small town, 650 population.
Yeah, wow.
And I don't have one in Salt Lake, but I've got one in that small town.
Yeah, that's it. Isn't it interesting? A town of 650, my mind goes to, you can really succeed pushing back in a town that small. Yeah. But I mean, even at the city level, right? You have a group of 10 intelligent community leaders that are just like, no, we're done with the nonsense. And yeah, you have a comment?
Well, yeah, and we had a friend who told us, or a member of DU, he told us about his friend who I believe lives in Harriman. He got the smart meter put on his house, and then his wife started having all these health issues. So then he contacted the water company or the electric company and said, I want this taken off. I opted into it, but now I want it off. And he had to pay a $300 bill to get it taken off and put the dumb meter back on. So, like, maybe you could get that meter taken off if you want.
Son, he was in a college dormitory, and they had 5Gs, and they had smart meters, and he got a brain tumor, and and a whole bunch of his friends that were in there got brain tumors. So it's not a good thing.
There's a book along those lines I'd recommend that really explains a lot of that, called The Invisible Rainbow, The History of Electricity and Life. Talks a lot about how radiation over the years and health effects, and I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, that's a real concern. So it's not just the surveillance, it's the health effects on people. Right. So moving to a small town, this is definitely an example of what they were talking about, that they're coming for the small towns. The governor wants to help your small town. They call it the Main Street Pilot Program. Let's go to all the small towns and upgrade Main Street with more foreign money from these grants. So who's funding this program but the Bear River Association of Governments? It's a regional government program. They're the primary funder of this small town initiative. And just to emphasize that they are what we've said regional government is, they represent 39 cities and towns, this region, but only 15 elected officials, so clearly not even all towns are represented. So some town is going to be getting something. They didn't even have a pretend voice. They act like they're a government. They've got regional planning, all these different things they do. And from their website, we ensure the orderly and harmonious coordination of federal, state, and local programs. Global. Yeah? Yep. Well, federal means federal, yeah, it's just all blurred. It's all blurred together. That's what we've been talking about with regionalism, breaking down the boundaries and so forth. Okay, now I'm going to move on. We need to understand how to recognize based on principles. Mike Lee and Mitt Romney use this issue on federal lands. So this has been a common thing we've heard a lot over the years, for decades actually, but especially in the last 10 years. Get our lands back from the feds. Sounds like a great anti-big government movement because the federal government shouldn't own lands, which is true. And so it's like, take it back from them. Why do they own all this land in Utah? We should take it back. Okay, so that is kind of a conservative thought process. As if these two conservatives were doing a conservative thing, they were happy to brag. The federal government owns more than 2/3 of Utah's land. That's the problem statement. This bill, this was earlier this year. This article was from April of this year. This bill that we put in would allow state or local governments to purchase parcels of federal land. So they're saying, we're going to give you the lands back from the feds, but you have to use it for high density. So which agenda is that promoting? Mike Lee said, supply is not meeting housing demand in Utah. The federal government's land ownership is a significant cause. Okay, the next one. So I talked about getting our lands back. We've done articles. We've got 10 years worth of articles on our website on Ken Ivory and his whole lands transfer movement. Anyone that's followed us has probably heard enough about Ken Ivory. Has anyone not heard of Ken Ivory? Okay, he's kind of disappeared from the scene because he became unpopular. But he's coming back. He's been back for like a year now. No. Why would... I gotcha. He sounds really good. Yeah. Repeat that? Yeah, they say he sounds good, and I heard him give a talk. Okay, Scott Bradley called Ken Ivory the most dangerous legislator in the United States. It's in our articles, right? So I'm not going to go into his whole program, but summarizing, you can see here what happened was, he said, let's get our lands back from the feds. I'm going to fight for the ranchers. I'm going to fight for the rural areas. We're going to get our property back. And what he did, he had this never-ending lawsuit enriching some lawyers somewhere with the state's money that eventually was just fizzled out and did nothing. In the meantime, they're passing all this legislation to build an 11 states Western Regional Compact so that we can transfer lands from the federal government into this regional compact. And then they gave that regional compact lawmaking ability, policing power, etc. So it was its own government in every way, right? Having all those powers. And so all of our articles are the nuts and bolts of all of that as we discovered it. One of the biggest things was when they stripped the sheriff of his authority to defend you. And that was one of the worst. And they did it because they took the idea of the Bureau, the Federal Bureau of Land Management, that's doing all these unconstitutional things in our rural areas, and they created a Utah Department of Land Management. So they were legalizing in a DLM that was at part of this regional structure what the BLM was doing unconstitutionally already. And so when they did that, and it was Mike Noel, Representative Mike Noel's bill. There were a few legislators that kind of put all this together. His bill said that the Division of Land Management has primary law enforcement. And so the way it was worded was, there was pushback. You know, we kind of said, hey everyone, they're taking your power away. I guess I'm talking more about this than I thought I was going to, right? But this article right here, Utah legislature moves to remove the power of the sheriff. Okay, as a response, Mike Noel, so every sheriff in the state was getting their phone ringing off the hook. You're going to let them take your power? And this is like shortly after the Bundys, and everyone's like, the sheriff's our guy. He's our guy, right? And so everyone is like, no, don't do that. Don't take the sheriff's power. And so this is a photo you can see of all the sheriffs traveled around the state so that they could calm them down and say, no, this is fine, we can do, it's okay. And so the language ended up saying the sheriff is the primary law enforcement except in cases of wildlife. So all they got to do is cry, desert turtle, and the sheriff has no power, right? Yeah. Unless he nullifies and says, according to the Constitution, you are not primary law enforcement. You can't violate the rights of my people. That's the whole point of nullification. Nullification can be executed at any level, at any time, using constitutionally, right? It's always there. So scary as like it all is that they're taking this over with regional government, the Constitution is in effect if people decide to start enforcing it. And we're going to talk about that some more. Okay, another conservative sellout, Jacob Anderegg. I forget what year this was, but he was passing bills for local high-density housing. Now, one that surprises a lot of people, this is a Libertas Institute video. It's just a few minutes long. I'm going to play it for you so you hear for yourself exactly what they were promoting.
Utah has a lot to be proud of. We've got a low unemployment rate and our economy is consistently ranked at the top compared to other states. Economic prosperity has attracted people from all over the country. But when they get here, many face a big problem, trying to find affordable housing. If you've recently tried to find a new place to live in Utah, then this will not come as a surprise to you. From transplants to locals, almost everyone has been affected by sky-high housing prices. Unfortunately, it seems these prices are not going anywhere but up. A recent study found that if current trends continue, in 26 years, the price of a house in the larger Utah cities would cost about $1.3 million. The report also found that housing prices are growing much faster than household incomes, making it difficult for families to find and maintain adequate housing. This leads to compromising spending on essentials like food and healthcare just to pay more for housing, and some may be forced to relocate to other states. One of the major contributing factors to these high prices is local government regulations. Restrictive zoning ordinances that limit or outright prohibit higher density makes it difficult for developers to respond to the market's demand for more affordable housing options. Huge fees, bureaucratic headaches, and angry neighbors all make it difficult to provide the affordable housing that Utah needs. In short, cities impose regulatory hurdles towards construction growth, especially for high density. In turn, a scarcity in supply means that the demand and the price goes up. Some of the factors leading to higher prices are inevitable, but restrictive government regulation does not have to be. Communities in Utah need to accept the reality we live in. Higher density housing options are needed if we want our children to have an affordable home here in Utah. For Libertas Institute, I'm Michelle Aiden.
Okay, so there's the libertarian excuse. The free market wants high-density housing, the government won't let us build it, right? So like I said, they will tell any audience anything they need to hear to promote the idea that they need. Yep.
Question, I drive around the valley and see all these huge developments for high-density housing. Do you know what the occupancy rate is in these places?
Yeah, I don't know.
To me, it just, in my brain, I'm thinking, you know, the builders have all these incentives to build a homes, whether it's grants or whether it's some kind of an interest subsidy or something like that. When the houses are built, if they build these empty apartments, it would seem to me that they can't afford to have them empty forever. But you know, China's gotten away with it for 20 years.
Cities, yeah.
And so, you know, there's a new in Holiday, where the old Cottonwood Mall was. They're putting in a apartment complex that looks like the Borg from, you know, out floating out in space. I mean, it's huge. I don't know how many apartments in there, but it's absolutely huge. This idea of having affordable housing, even I don't care if it's a 1,000 square foot apartment that somebody lives in, it's never affordable.
Right.
People can't afford anything because of various other economic factors. But do you know what, or can we find out somewhere what the occupancy rate is and why builders have the incentive to keep building and building and building without having these apartments filled?
Well, we already know the grant money. So if they wanted
Sure.
to, they could artificially incentivize it for a long time. Yeah, comment?
I think they're doing that.
I'm working on one right now, and they're all 1 to 2 bedroom, basically. And they're like $1,500 a month or more.
Yeah, I remember moving to Clovis, New Mexico, out in the middle of nowhere, and I was trying to find a place to rent. And the nicest place in the town was Section 8. And so they said, no, you can't live here, no matter what you want to pay.
Yeah. So maybe they're filling them, but either way, they're building them, whether they fill them or not. A quick case study on property rights, because I want us to think through the practical application and pushback, and also what is right and what is wrong. In order to win at liberty in general and restore our nation, we have to understand the principles and be really good at applying them in the situations that we face in reality. Okay? So, this is a common thing in everywhere in the country now, right? Someone wants to build high-density housing. Someone else doesn't want them to build it. Okay? Mr. Builder wants to build high-density housing on his property. Mr. Neighbor doesn't like it. Do we have to allow it to defend Mr. Builder's right to use his own property? Is that a good question? Do we have to allow it? If we don't at least ask that question, we're not being honest, we're not principled, and we can't defend freedom. So we have to ask the question. Okay, consider if these two are by themselves. So a default position to take when you think about someone and their property rights, Mr. Builder would have the right to build whatever he wants on his property if he owns it fully. When you own something, Art Thompson said one time, you have the right to use it, sell it, or dispose of it, or whatever, right? All the rights are yours if you own it. Only you get to decide what happens if you're a true owner. So by default, you would start there. Well, it's his property, but ask the question. Under what conditions would Mr. Neighbor have the right to stop Mr. Builder? Mr. Builder must violate the rights of Mr. Neighbor in some way in order to use force to stop Mr. Builder. Force is defense when someone is attacking your rights. Otherwise, force is not justified. So he must be attacking your rights in some way. Will building the high density violate the rights of Mr. Neighbor? The initial building is not likely to harm Mr. Neighbor. It's his property. He can put a chicken coop. He can put a house. He can put a giant tall building, right? Doesn't sound like it's going to harm him. Will Mr. Neighbor have to pay for increased police so that Mr. Builder can make his profit? There's a better question, right? Will Mr. Neighbor have to pay for new city infrastructure so that Mr. Builder can make his profit? Okay. Possibly is he starting to pull out of the pocket of Mr. Neighbor? Possibly, right? The devil's in the details, so you have to have an honest conversation in every situation. If Mr. Neighbor has to pay for the costs of anything for the benefit of Mr. Builder, then Mr. Builder might be stealing from Mr. Neighbor, in which case Mr. Neighbor has a right to defend himself, if that's what's happening. If Mr. Builder can calculate all the costs, okay, short and long term, and show that he will bear all the burdens for all those costs, and Mr. Neighbor is no longer affected in any way, then perhaps Mr. Builder must be allowed to build. Can you really, that might be the difficult thing. Can you identify what all of the repercussions will be, right? And maybe there's a point where it's like so long term, sure, if I breathe air and breathe out, you might breathe my CO2. You know, like, there's a point where it could be ridiculous, but you can reasonably calculate some immediate, short-term, and various effects, right? Again, the devil's in the details. Scott Bradley actually suggested this to me, a cost recovery using a cost to provide model where all costs must be borne by the property owner. Maybe that's a good way for local municipalities to resolve situations like this, right? He gave an example of like a town where, and it was a real example he'd experienced where there was an area with these really big, rich houses, and they had built it in an area where it was very difficult to get water. And the city had to spend all this extra infrastructure to get water up there and feed their mansions and swimming pools. And everybody's water bill was going up. And so it became an issue in the town. But if there was some way to put, like, I'm not a water engineer, but some mechanism so that all the burden and cost was over only the people who wanted to benefit from it, then the regular town folk wouldn't have a complaint anymore, right? So one way to think about it. Okay, other considerations. Okay, remember the labor theory of property. Okay, exerting labor on a natural resource establishes a property right. So if a community as a whole has adopted an expectation by the representation of the people, and they have invested labor, meaning their time and resources, to intentionally create a certain type of community, it is arguably a property right of the community, and they can arguably defend that expectation to preserve their way of life. So I'm going to give you a very clear example for that. There's a town somewhere in the east of the United States where radiation is not allowed. No cell towers, no electrical radiating equipment. People move there because they're extra electrically sensitive, more than the rest of us. And so it's a quiet town, it's electrically quiet town. And there's rules there. They're not being tyrannical to say you can't have a cell tower. People have gone there and invested in a community with their time and labor and resources to create this situation, and like-minded people gather. So if some guy came into town and said, I'm putting a cell tower right smack dab in the middle of this town on my property, no, he's blowing away their entire investment for hundreds of families. I don't know how many people live there, right? But you can see that's a very clear example. So arguably, small rural towns or medium towns or just anyone that doesn't have high density, you're bringing high density in, it's arguably a very similar situation. What are all the long-term costs? That's not even considering it's from the United Nations. This is just if people wanted to do it, right? So can you calculate all the costs and not affect your neighbors? If the incoming high density in no way infringes on the community in any type of cost or this community collective property right or expectation, then maybe they should be allowed to do as he wishes. Okay, but then this is the final, to me, settles the argument, right? Everything else is an intellectually honest debate, looking at both sides. Now you're talking about foreign invasion. Is this truly a local project? Or is it coming from interests that are foreign to the community? Does this foreign interest have plans to change the neighborhood and eventually make all the neighbors bear the burdens of the consequences? Is there evidence for this strategy or conspiracy? Absolutely. Everything we've just shown tonight.
So I'm wondering logistically, to that question, is it truly a local project or is it the interest of a foreign community or invasion? If you can prove that builder so-and-so is building a project because he was bought off or somehow acting on foreign interest because of one of these city planning regional groups that manipulated or influenced him to do that. Mm-hmm. Logistically, is there a way that on a local level you can try to stop a development like that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is understanding that and bringing it up, right? And then these are just the conversations you have to educate the community, and people have to be showing up at their meetings, and this is more of a deep dive actually for January, but yeah, I think so. You got to start with that. Start with educating people. People have to just know this is what's happening before then you can kind of decide now where do you go. If you have reasonable council members locally, they'll listen to it. They ought to agree and understand that. I mean, are they going to compensate all the other neighbors for the costs they're going to bear, right? And I think you can make spreadsheets. I mean, it depends on how much they're going to demand evidence, but if they're reasonable, it shouldn't have to go that far, right? Especially, I'm hoping a lot of smaller towns in Utah can just put a stop to this by understanding it. That's kind of what I hope. I have no hope that the City Council in Salt Lake cares, right? But you know, start with protecting all the small towns, right? As many as we can.
Yeah, if you can affect it such that you move toward a free market, a truly free market for everyone in the community, then you're always better off. So what you'll find is that the people that are building these projects are getting special favors. And if you can root out what's going on and who's granting it, then you can really cause a stir.
And I think we saw they're probably all getting grant money, you know, to do these kinds of buildings. And so I'd be shocked if you found someone who didn't. But even if they weren't, the ideas come, you know, they probably know somebody who knows somebody who, you know, who gave them the idea. One small town, let's see, Mayfield, I think maybe. There's a small town. They didn't even have sidewalks. They don't have a fire department. They're small town. And one guy from the League of Cities and Towns comes and shows up in his town. And all of a sudden they're announcing a 230% tax increase on their properties. Out of nowhere. Okay, that's a foreign meddling in their local government, right? Where did the idea come from, I think, is the first aspect. Is it from the people? Does it benefit the people? So just that alone, I think, is the beginning of it.
I have kids in the building trades, you know, building homes and stuff. They have so much trouble getting what they need to build these houses, where these big, you know, developments, they get everything. You know, somehow they have priority on this supply chain.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, so by these are natural things they can do to manipulate, right? Yeah, which is conspiracy right there, right?
I think it'd be cool to know which towns are starting to learn this, so you could be attracted to that or participate, like a database.
Yeah, so I'm available to present to any city council that is willing to listen, right? We actually have a city council rep here who came down here, and I went to their town that she invited me, and I did a similar presentation to their
Millville.
Right? And so I would like to go, I'm going to show you an invitation I have to cities here in a minute. Okay, but first step, every city is paying a membership fee to the League of Cities and Towns. Stop. Right? If you don't want this and you want control of your own town and represent your people, start by stop paying your dues to something. What are they even doing for you? I know they have a few, I think they do like group insurance or something. And they have a few carrots that probably make you feel like, oh, we can't cancel that. Right? But there's a place to start, right? And then, but I have a city-specific presentation that I'm continually fine-tuning, that any town that you want, if the city council is willing to listen, then I'd like to go give it. Right. I've given it to one city so far. Yeah. Yeah.
So I know a few people on my city council. How would you recommend, like, pitching this or bringing it up?
Let's talk afterwards about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, let's coordinate and talk about that. All right. So some conclusions, invitations, and thoughts on solutions. Okay. How do you fix this mess? Okay, I'm going to introduce a new thought, which is not new, it's what we've been talking about, but I'm going to think about applying it and seeing something for what it is that maybe you hadn't thought about before. In this system, our cities should be nullifying the county when they do something wrong. Counties should nullify the state and so forth. Everybody should be guardians of the Constitution, right? This is a healthy federal system where checks and balances are constantly happening. The founders made human nature advantageous. That was the intention, so that officers in each jurisdiction would guard their power against encroachments from the other. Okay, political parties have really blown that apart, right? That's why George Washington warned against them, okay? But nullification is not just something that governments can do against each other, government entities. Everyone, Government represents the people. The only reason they have a right to nullify another government agency when they're violating the Constitution is because they represent their citizens, the individuals, and the individual is who has the right to say you can't violate my rights. So any extension of the individual has the right to nullify. In 2020, if you went down to the county building and they told you to put on a mask and you said no, you nullified. But it wasn't like you were just being obstinate and doing what you wanted. You had a right, a natural right protected by the Constitution. They had no authority to tell you to put one on, right? So that's a small micro nullification. So as individuals assemble over time, that generates power in the people. And then you can nullify as a community. Okay, you can add your First Amendment right to assemble. It builds new layers. That's what the Founding Fathers did with, and this is way before, they weren't like, let's have a revolution, and that's not even the point. The point is, they had a right to assemble and represent themselves. And the people can assemble and defend the law as it has been given to us by the founders and as it sits. So taking this mess and adding another layer of accountability, you can't, who here trusts elections? Okay, right? I will uphold any honest system of government that defends the rights of the people. So that's all I'm going to say about that today, because that's the deep dive for January. Okay? And there's been a variety of experiments that we've done that we're going to walk you through and talk about. Okay? So pivoting back then, after giving you that little carrot for January. So these are the invitations I would give to cities. Is your taxpayer-funded city membership in regional governments actually serving your city in any way? Withdraw your membership. Be suspicious of invasion with attractive external money. Another small town I went to, I gave a different presentation. It wasn't this specific one. Kusharam. Anyone heard of that town? I think they had some regional guy show up. He wasn't even part of any group I'd ever heard of. So it was a new one. I'm like, you know, they were talking about just money, right? Small town, you don't need a $3 million grant or some big foreign investment so you can have new buses or something, right? There's always like a big carrot. You start to feel like, oh, maybe we can like level up our town, right? I think the carrot in Mayfield for the raising the taxes, the guy was throwing out, well, we can have a fire department someday. We can start having sidewalks. It's like, well, okay, who asked for those things? Who needs those things? Not that they're bad, fine, if the people want them, then fund it locally, if that's what the people want, right? But don't bring strings into your town from somewhere else. Remove the position of city manager. Where is that in any Republican form of government? Let each mayor govern. The mayor is the elected executive. You have a city manager with his central planning degree who stays there from mayor to mayor to mayor. He's running the town. He makes, right? It's a lazy way for the mayor to be like, you know, and, you know, maybe someone can be elected as mayor. They don't know how this works. Someone's like, oh, city manager's got it, right? And I can kind of imagine you can quickly, it doesn't feel like you're doing anything wrong, you know, but it's passing the buck, right? So be accountable. All right. So if this stuff is already in your local areas, we need to start reversing it. Arthur Thompson said, it costs a great deal more money to lie to the people, to organize them into enslaving themselves than it does to tell the truth. How much money is spent in the movies and the TV to make us believe things, and then finally someone just says something profound, you're like, oh, never thought of it that way. And millions of dollars worth of TV programming in 10 years of your life just changed, right? From like a principle the founders told you, it's the first time you heard it. Right, it's why they hate nullification. It probably takes $1 for every $1,000 of propaganda to undo what they do. Sometimes the ratio is even greater.
Will this be available online?
Yes, yes. Yeah, it'll be available online. The first place to look for our content is the website, defendingutah.org. If I put something up on Twitter or on Facebook or some other channel, I'll first put it on the article or on the website usually in the form of an article. And so if you're on the mailing list or you just check the website, it's usually where you definitely get what we're working on. But I try to put everything out wherever I can with what time I have. Yeah. Okay. So educating the people. We're almost done, just for the record. So how did Samuel Adams educate the people? Okay, because he understood, just like Art Thompson did, the importance of basic education. Okay, Samuel Adams saw that in order for independence to be realized, for it to maintain itself, that these ideas of liberty would have to be dispersed throughout the colonies. He worked for 20 years promoting the cause of liberty in his educational programs. He proposed assembling committees of correspondence to be established throughout the colonies because he desired all people to be educated in order that they could reason out their rights on their own. Now, you can't be fooled. If you understand the principle, then the next fad that comes along that sounds different, you'll acknowledge the principle. You can reason it out. We have to be able to have that skill as a people. So, we have a Samuel Adams education waiting for you. These are all, I know it's small writing, but there's so many things we're covering. Okay? These are all the various principles in the Constitution, Bill of Rights that the Founding Fathers gave us. We are, let's see. Okay, we are providing, starting this month, this program. You cannot uphold the law or help your representatives do it if you don't know the law. Just like a police officer can't uphold the legislative law if he doesn't know what he's upholding. We're the enforcers of the Constitution. We have to know it. So starting December 2022, every Monday night, 8 p.m., constitutional scholar Dr. Scott Bradley is going to be your personal tutor if you're interested. Classes are recorded for the ones you miss. You can watch them forever. So that's an invitation to you guys. So on the walls here, we have these QR codes. We put them all over. It'll take you to the sign-up page on your mobile devices or whatever, wherever it is, or that's the link right there. Okay, so become a member, and it's every Monday night, and he's top-notch. We've already done 2 classes with him, and he's one of the few people I listen to that I still learn new, profound things. When I want to learn how to apply something in a unique scenario that's been bothering me, he's like always got the answer. Things that I debate with other friends or former friends over the years, he's got the principle, and I can't unlearn it once I learn it because it's natural law. I understand it. I love it. I love it so much. There's my plug there. So how we solve this problem, regionalism, high-density housing, this invasion of Agenda 21. Okay, our first option, the traditional solutions through legislation. Okay? If you go this route, you must start thinking solution-oriented in your legislation efforts. Okay? Legislators are not going to propose bills that actually fix the problems that we want fixed. They won't do it. If they even understand the problems, who knows, right? I'm sure definitely some do. Some are very much on the wrong side. Okay? Throughout the last 10 years of defending Utah, as we've come across issues, my mind has always thought, well, what would actually just fix this problem? I'm always trying to get to just the bottom line. How do you just fix it? And I found myself often, a number of times, just drafting my own bill. Well, if we just change this code and this, it's very simple. There's bad law that people are using to justify tyrannical things. Just fix the code. So I wrote these up. various experiences over the years of giving them to legislators. Sometimes our Defending Utah members, as constituents, give it to their representatives. And every single time, with one exception, they won't run them when they recognize it's a real bill. Whoa, wait a minute. I'm not going to get everyone on board with that one. They're not going to vote for my bill, right? They all want to do fluff or whatever the political establishment wants them to do. The exception, we almost got a bill passed because it was a bill that was unrelated to what the senator usually worked on, until insiders heard what we were doing and back channel, hey, don't run that bill, you're going to ruin everything I've been working towards. That was back in the, when they took away the right for parents to opt out of vaccines just by saying I'm not interested. They were working on centralizing that database. Okay, so you have to get good bills in if you're going to fix it through the legislature. So we've got to actually elect good people. How difficult is that? Sounds like an uphill battle. Even if we could get one guy to just run a real bill, we kind of had hope that we could actually rally support to make it unpopular not to pass it. We've rallied support to kill bills a lot. We've had very few opportunities to rally behind an actual good bill, because there really aren't very many, right? Maybe little good things here and there, not that really fix the problems that we need. So this is a lifetime of firefighting, even if you can do this. Okay, and then at the end of the day, it only affects the federal system. It doesn't touch the regional system. Okay, so there are some problems with that. The other one is what we're going to talk about in January. Our second option, committees. Be like Samuel Adams. Okay, we're going to talk about the natural law of power in assembling, exercising our First Amendment right to assemble, petition for redress, and represent ourselves. What I call community nullification. Okay, we're going to talk about a variety of natural law tools for transferring influence. Okay, people are attracted to what is good, what is consistently good. This is avoiding what I call the arsonists altogether. All these issues we deal with are like fires, but because it's a conspiracy, there's an arsonist setting fires everywhere. Okay, we can be condemned to a lifetime of firefighting, or we can avoid the arsonists. Now, really, I would say do both. Is my suggestion, for a variety of reasons we'll cover in January. Next steps: share this online with others. It's going to be online. Share it around. Tell your friends about this conversation, and watch it again. Plan to come in person for the Solutions Deep Dive. It might only be in person. I might not do it online. I'm debating that still. If you are new to Defending Utah, take our boot camp course, our Introductions to Liberty and Conspiracy. And then get your Samuel Adams education. You can't assemble an act without the foundation. So, again, I invite you to sign up. QR codes are on the wall. Also, we've also posted these on the wall. I think you got the date wrong on the second one. Yes. Yeah, it'll be here. January 19th is the Health Solutions Forum. So we have 2 health speakers. I think health is a big part of our liberty because of how they're attacking that right now. The inventors of ivermectin are coming back to talk about a new discovery they want to share. And then we have the founder of Cardio Miracle, who's going to talk about conspiracy and health as well. So that should be fun. That's a free event. Thursday, January 19th, we'll be here. And then we'll be the Solutions Deep Dive. Thank you for coming this evening and giving me your time. And we'll just dismiss for the evening.
Great presentation.